So good morning. All right, so this is a room full of arts folks, education folks. So when I say good morning, good morning. Amazing, on cue. It's as if you've heard this before. So on behalf of KPCC and LAist, welcome to our Crawford Family Forum. My name's John Cohn. I manage KPCC in person, which is the live programming and events platform for KPCC and the LAist. In addition to our radio and digital news service, we do a range of events, live broadcasts, tapings, performances and presentations at theaters, community conversations, and forums just like this one. To learn more about us and our upcoming events, check out kpcc.org/in-person. I do also want to note that we're kicking off the third season of our community-centered storytelling series, Unheard LA. We're back for a third season, thanks to the generosity of the California Wellness Foundation. So if you haven't already, RSVP for that live show will be at the El Portal in North Hollywood on March 30th. Make sure you write that down. So join us for that. You can find out more about that also at kpcc.org/in-person. So today we're talking about the arts and lives of teachers and students. If you have further thoughts on that, we would love to hear from you. You saw some slides on the screen. Reach out to Carla Javier, our arts education reporter who's hosting today. Quincy Surasmith is in the back collecting thoughts. Do not be shy. We really love to hear from folks. It informs what we do, allows us to better cover the important topics and areas of interest in our region. Speaking of, on your chair, you should have a Connect with KPCC sign-up sheet. You have those in the little golf bowling pencils. Please fill that out if you feel comfortable. This allows us to reach out to you on topics that you consider yourself an expert in, like, for example, arts or arts education or education. And again, it informs how we report on related stories. Be advised, this is confidential. We don't share your contact information, and your participation allows us to do a better job doing what we do. Some quick housekeeping, the really exciting stuff. As a news organization, we are audio recording and live video streaming this event, so you're okay to use your devices, but please put them on silent mode. Just be respectful of your neighbors. Photos are okay, but please no flash and no audio or video recording. Believe me, we got that covered. We invite you to join us on social media using the hashtag ArtsEd, and feel free to hit us up with questions there for our audience Q&A later in the program. If I've missed anything or you have any questions about KPCC or in person, please feel free to talk to me or any members of our team after the event. We'd love to chat with you, but that is enough of me for now. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming your host for the day, our arts education reporter, Carla Javier.
Thanks, John. Thank you so much for being here this morning. We are here to talk about arts and arts education by listening to arts educators and teaching artists talk to us about what happens inside their classrooms and their moments with their teachers. And we're doing this because we know that education coverage in the news can sometimes stop at the classroom door. We hear about school board meetings, we hear about budgets and policies, but we don't necessarily always hear the experiential side of things from the room where that education is actually happening. So we're going to try something new today. Think of this like a show and tell. These are real-world life experiences that these arts educators and artists who share their skills have chosen to share with us today. And after each one of them shares their story, we'll have a conversation about the challenges and successes that have come up in their first-person accounts. And at the end, we'll open it up to your questions. So without further ado, I'll introduce our first teacher. Her name is Sophia Cuevas. She has been teaching for 7 years. Now she teaches at Santa Ana Unified High in Santa Ana Unified at Santa Ana High School. I was first introduced to Sophia's work when she wrote to us through that Public Insight Network, the same thing that those cards on your chairs are all about. She said that introducing art changed how she teaches, and she wrote in with this story about her first year teaching English through a film hybrid course. So it's a way of teaching that teaches writing and literature and the other topics typical to English class, but doing it through the use of filmmaking techniques. Sophia Cuevas.
My first year teaching high school, I was given a great task and a large learning curve. I would teach a hybrid English course. Students would have me for English, receiving English credit, but they would do so through the means of film and television production. all while utilizing my skills and knowledge of speech and debate communication courses that I had taught in prior years. I would be creating new curriculum to link that of English standards to filmmaking and communications. It was Miguel's first year too. I quickly introduced how the class was run. Different from many academic courses he would encounter, this class uses the art of filmmaking to help you develop your voice as a writer, creator, and storyteller, amongst other things. Students often bemoan the task of writing. They sit staring at a blank page, a cursor taunting their very first word. But in film, the scripting process is very different. Our first task together that semester was to understand the structure of the hero's journey. We first read the Odyssey. Here was another one of those long-awaited sighs with students as we took out our text. We began. The hero's journey is a 12-step process. Odysseus goes through the journey of many trials, tribulations, challenges, conflicts, missteps. But his motivation is to get home, to get back to step one. I suppose, at this moment in the story and in the journey, the lesson piqued Miguel's interest. He began to respond to questions, to argue with the ideal of everyone being a hero and on a journey. He struggled with putting thoughts to paper, but was at the ready for our weekly debates. What makes a hero? Can the Odyssey written years ago relate to you now? If not, why not? What would you change in the structure of the hero's journey? Does it need to be changed? Miguel quickly learned. Once we finished dissecting the story through the hero's journey structure, it was now students' turn to write about their own hero's journey, their first narrative essay in a high school English classroom. Again, the expectation of an English teacher are the moans and groans, but this time, there was silence with the quick clicks of fingers to keyboard. Miguel would look up, pausing for moments at a time, then his head would drop back to continue his writing journey. On average, I received a 12-page narrative essay from each student. I really only needed 3 pages. But I got to learn a lot about my students. And then we began to script the stories into visual language. At this point, the students fully understood the game. Develop stories that look and sound like us for an audience through in-depth storytelling. Miguel completely took to the process like it was the air he breathed. He started out as an actor. He played a role no one was comfortable portraying at the time, a gay student too afraid to come out to his friend and the world because of fear of being the other. He then transitioned into being a director, understanding the concept of story development, visual literacy, imagery, and thus communicating a vision to a team of people. Miguel stayed after school, came in on Saturdays, stayed behind at lunch, watched YouTube videos on editing and camera equipment. He would talk to me about story ideas and storylines. He worked with some of our film guest mentors that worked in the industry that would continuously ask for clarification or help or guidance. And he created. At lunchtime every day during his production, he would sit next to my desk, chip bag in hand, to ask me about his research or his storyline structure or which sounds would make the most noise for the right reaction. As I ate alongside him and helped him develop his documentary, there was something else to the conversation I could not quite pinpoint at the time, but I am now fully aware of. Miguel became impassioned. He took equipment home, he raised money to buy himself a camera, he edited into the early hours of morning, sending me rough edits over the weekend for feedback. It was on a Saturday that I took a moment to ask Miguel something I had been wondering about for some time. He stood there placing an Ursa mini camera on a tripod with an 18mm lens. So I asked, "How did you get here?" He, as many teen begin in answer to a question, started with, "I don't know." A long pause, and then, as he saw the monitor on the camera that he rigged with a clamp, the lens hood, the Sennheiser mic, the boom pole, and the sound mixer all set up in a matter of 10 minutes, he looked over at me with a ta-da expression. Next, he would work on the dolly rail. And he replied, "I just wanted more. I didn't want what I saw, and I didn't want to be hungry my whole life. I wanted to be successful, but happy." Here he was on a Saturday talking about what he remembered when he was younger. He went to school to get a full meal. It was where he got breakfast and lunch. He knew by 6th grade he wasn't expected to go beyond the environment he was living. And yet, here was Miguel, setting up over $3,500 worth of equipment just to learn how to set it up and to play with some different types of shots for the fun of learning and storytelling through filmmaking. In the last 3.5 years, Miguel has participated in, engaged in, created, and produced a short narrative film, an episodic TV pilot series, a documentary, 5 commercials, and an experimental senior thesis. In the following years, he may continue to film, but he will always find creative outlets to rewrite his journey on the many blank pages in front of him.
It's Sophia Cuevas, everyone. Okay, so Sophia, what jumped out to me when you first sent me this story was that it was Miguel's first year and yours too, kind of teaching in this film hybrid English class format. So I want to ask you, how has this experience with Miguel and with that class impacted how you approach teaching that English class now?
So I quickly realized that students need space to create, whether that may be in a science class, English class, history class, but they need space and time to just formulate their ideas, to apply their ideas, to fail with their ideas. And watching Miguel just take time to think, to play, to figure things out made all the difference in the world for both me and him. I allowed students to take time. I allowed them to have a space to create.
And I have to ask you, I mean, how did you learn about film yourself so you could create that space for your students?
So a couple different ways, I guess. One, I was in speech and debate. So as an actor, you kind of start realizing a stage and stage setups and cameras and how people mic you. But then when I started doing the class or writing curriculum, I met with filmmakers. I worked with 2 particular filmmaker mentors. One was a producer and another one was a director, Jessica Just and Polo Munoz. And together, just going back and forth, I started creating with them, getting on camera with them, doing sound with them, creating curriculum that linked with my curriculum. And it was, again, that space to create.
Yeah, and then was that something that you had experience with before film, or was that something that you kind of chose to do in your class?
I never had that experience before, but I was chosen, and I chose to do it in my class because it just made sense. You combine English storytelling with filmmaking. It was like, yeah, duh. Why else would you want to read a book? Aside from story, but you know, people are making a lot of money. This is a career. This is an industry, and our students deserve to tap into it.
And that leads actually well into the next thing that I wanted to ask you, which is, what kind of feedback did you get when you had this idea, we're going to teach English through film? What kind of feedback did you get from, parents, the students?
Students thought it was cool. They thought it was, I'm getting credit for English and I don't have to do a boring book report or a boring essay. They took to it like it was candy, it was fun for them. Parents liked it at the beginning of the year. They were like, oh, how fun, my kid is holding a camera, cute. By senior year, they were like, but what are they gonna do with it? And so it became one of those there's internships and there's a bunch of places they can go through the skills they're picking up. They don't have to be filmmakers. They can be creators in general. Administration, there were some people who didn't understand it. They thought it was too much, too crazy, impossible to support for years to come. But there was others that were important within our district that believed in the arts, and so they supported it 100%, and they saw the results with students because they would come back.
Can you talk about those results a little bit? I mean, we've obviously heard this kind of story, but like this course you've mentioned has some like career technical things to it. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so it started evolving to be an English, art, and career technical education course all in one. And as we started getting more funding and we started getting more support, Chapman University came down and watched our students in production mode. And they turned around, they're like, so they're doing this how long? And I was like, 4 years. First year is narrative filmmaking, next year is TV episodic, the third year is documentary, and their final year is their senior thesis. And their dean laughed and he was like, well, that's what our college students are doing. And I was like, well, maybe you want our students. So sure enough, in just this past year, they opened up 10 full ride scholarships to just our film students to get, as a full-on pathway. So that was just one example. But then they get the students, whenever somebody comes into the classroom, or at this point, because in production mode, the kids aren't even in the classroom. They're all over the campus filming. But when they watch the students, it's the first question is, can I hire your student? And that's when I get to turn around on parents and say, like, do you see? And so those are just like the adult responses. In student responses, and I might tear up on this one because we do have students who go home hungry. We have students who don't have money, they don't have support, they don't have family. And they come to school every day for this class. And they find their voice, they find themselves through this class. And a student that was never intended to make it is now going to college. And not just like, oh, I'm going to college, but I'm going to college on a full ride scholarship. So they themselves, the students, and it's kind of funny because recently we had some observations and a couple adults came in and they're like, well, you know, it's great that these seniors are going to go on next year. And I was like, these aren't seniors, these are freshmen. And they're like, no, these aren't freshmen. And I was like, no, they're like they are self-advocates and they found their voice and they found their way. And so in the following years to come, they're just adding to their resume at this point.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sophia. We'll talk more at the end. So that was the experience of a teacher at a public high school in Santa Ana Unified. So I want to turn now to another experience from a different teacher. When I met our next guest, I was working on a story about art in Dia de los Muertos. And at the time, Larcie Martinez was an English and art teacher at a school in El Monte called Youth Build Charter School of California. It's a school set up to help students who might have struggled in other high school environments for any number of reasons. Her creative approach to working with her students and using art in her classroom really stuck out to me. So when I knew I was going to do this event, I had to reach out to her. I'll let Larcie take it from here. Larcie Martinez.
I wasn't sure exactly what my students would be like when I entered the bright yellow painted classroom almost 8 years ago. But I was excited and up for whatever and whoever life was to bring me. The students in my classroom were those that other schools had asked to leave. Our small school was, for many, their last opportunity at getting a high school diploma. Many of our young people were dropping back into the classroom from various difficult circumstances. Some aged out of their previous schools. Some were coming back to school for the first time after being incarcerated or becoming parents for the first time. I taught English and art and loved my students. The first couple of years I tried to teach just focused on the basics, such as writing and reading comprehension. After spending time with my students and getting to know their stories and the daily struggles they faced, I quickly realized that teaching just focused on their academics wasn't enough for our young people. I became more worried about how students were doing holistically instead of just how they were doing with their reading and writing skills. I began to understand that for many students, it was difficult to focus on academics when they were dealing with past and current heart wounds. So I began to explore more ideas of finding ways to heal from the wounds and trauma that our youth faced. It was no longer just about teaching English or art, but about finding ways to allow for expression of emotions, both positive and negatives, in a place of safety. I recalled an impactful experience where I used art to share my own story. This experience made me want to be even more intentional with bringing the arts as a form of healing into my teaching. I decided that one of my art classes would be turned into a theater class, where students would write their own short stories about an important moment in their life. In order to get the young people comfortable with the idea of creating their own theater pieces, we would begin each class with breathing exercises, movement, and dance circles. During these movement activities, we would explore various emotions, and through the breathing, exercises, and dance circles, we would become in sync with each other. At first, it was sometimes difficult to get the students to participate, but once we became more comfortable with each other, I was able to ask the students to free write about an important moment in their life. They then shared their stories with each other and provided feedback to one another. The stories they shared ranged from the challenges of coming out to their parents, going on a skateboarding adventure, and the pain and joy of giving birth, to immigrating to the United States and the incarceration of a loved one. I was at first unsure how my young people would react to each other's stories, but their response was so beautiful. They would laugh when it was funny, and they would get up and hug someone when they saw that their classmate needed support. It was pretty magical to watch them respond and connect to each other. One student whose story particularly resonated with the class was a student we'll call Daniel. When Daniel first came to our school, it was clear he didn't want to be there. The first time he walked into my classroom, he had his hoodie and his guard up. The more I got to know him and the more he shared with me, the more I came to understand that he was a very bright young man who was angry and unsure about his future because of the struggles he had experienced in life. As he began to spend more time in our school, he began to grow in confidence. In our theater art class, Daniel chose to tell the story about the time his close friend was killed at a party they were attending. This was a difficult topic to share and to listen to, but it was also very powerful, and it connected with the students. The students chose Daniel's story as one that the whole class would turn into a theater piece and share with students at a partner school. It was so inspiring to watch them come together and use their resources at hand to make their collective theater piece come to life. Classroom chairs became the cars they drove to get to the party, and water bottles became the beer drunk at the party. I gave my class the freedom to create their own roles, and this allowed them to step into a role they were comfortable with. Those that were not comfortable being at the forefront became the people dancing or talking in the background of the party, whereas those who felt more comfortable taking the stage became the main characters in the story, and Daniel played himself. Although Daniel technically was the director of his own story, it became a collective experience to direct it. Different classmates would naturally speak up and offer ideas as to what could make the scene more engaging to the audience. By the end of the semester, the students felt that they were ready to share their theater piece. There were funny moments in the piece, such as when Daniel and his friends are joking with each other while they're getting ready to go to the party, when they get lost trying to find the party house, and when the students in the party scene are dancing and being silly. Then there was the most difficult part of the piece, when a loud pounding on a table represents the gunshot and one of the student actors falls and portrays and the partygoers flee the scene except for Daniel and his friends. They walk to their fallen friend and freeze into place. There is a second or two of silence. Then Daniel and his friends reach down to pick up their classmate and embrace him. After each rehearsal of Daniel's piece, my students and I would gather together in circle to share and process our thoughts and reflections on the piece, how we felt, what made us comfortable and uncomfortable during the rehearsal, whether or not something was too much or not enough. The sharing of his story and the collective creation it brought my students and myself closer to each other and made us more compassionate and loving with one another. The students saw themselves in each other and saw that our differences in life were minor. Both our moments of struggles and our moments of joy united us. The day for us to present our theater pieces with our partner school was upon us. The students had already performed their various pieces at our own school. They received much praise and admiration for their bravery in sharing these stories from their classmates and the staff. But what would it be like to share their stories with students they didn't know at a different school? Would they be laughed at? Would anyone care about their stories? We arrived at the partner school and were greeted by students and their teacher, who is a friend and former coworker. After surveying the small stage and their surroundings, the students began to rearrange the stage for the first performance. Daniel's was the final piece. His piece began just as they had rehearsed it, with the car chairs speeding through the neighborhood streets, trying to find the house party, and arriving to the party where they were greeted by friends and enjoyed in the revelry. Then the loud bang ensues, and the friend is down. The audience was engaged. They had been engaged throughout the different pieces. Yet this time, there is an audible silence waiting to see what would happen. When Daniel and his friends picked up their friend from the ground, signaling the end of the piece, the rest of the cast came back to the stage, and the audience burst into claps and cheers. I could see the look of accomplishment and pride from my students. Their stories had been heard and had been received with love and enthusiasm. Walking back to the metro station on our way home, I could hear the students' conversation. They were filled with excitement and empowerment over what they had accomplished, astonishment at how well their stories had been received, and optimism for their future. Then I heard Daniel's voice call out, "Hey, miss, when are we doing this again?"
That's Larcie Martinez. Hi. All right. So I have to know, so the students did this performance of Daniel's piece for other students at a different school. What happened? How did they receive it? What happened right after that performance?
It was very organic. The students all kind of sat down on the stage and they just started talking to each other, like the students who were the audience from the different school. And the teacher and I, my friend and I, would just step back and we let them talk to each other. And it was actually Daniel who took the lead, and he started explaining, well, this is how we did it. This is how long it took. This is why we chose these stories. And the audience students, they were saying, I went through something like that. This is what happened when I was going through this. How did you deal with this? So they started counseling each other. And so that was really beautiful to see, because I could tell that my students had gained confidence and knowledge and also validation in the sharing of their own story, right? And the young people who were listening, they were connecting to the students on stage, and they were able to see that they're not too different from each other, that they've experienced similar things, that they have emotions that are allowed to be expressed. So it was beautiful to watch, and that's something that will always stay in me, just that conversation that they had with each other, sharing with each other, and caring about each other's stories.
And I want to ask you, so this was a theater piece that Daniel and his classmates worked on. How did you come up with the idea of using not just art, but theater specifically with this group of students? Why did you think that would work?
So this theater is based on a Theater of the Oppressed, right? And I was a part of a community in Echo Park at the Belmont Art Space about 4 or 5 years ago. And it was something that was taught to me, and I participated in telling the stories of the community members. We were involved with that. And I realized that this was so powerful. I had read about it, right? And then I actually experienced it. And the year before we did this theater piece, we did a poetry, like a spoken mic night with some of my young people. And so I felt that this was the next step to take that now to tell, not just through poetry and action, but now through the whole theater piece. And so that's where I felt like, I think this group can do this.
But theater, in my experience, because I went to your classroom when you were teaching there, theater isn't the only art form that you used with them. Can you talk about how you chose the different things to teach different things?
So about 4 or 5 years ago, after my experience at the art space that I was a part of, I decided to intentionally bring in arts as a form of healing into my classroom. And the young people and I created a collective. It's called Apapachar Arts Collective. And apapachar means to hug from the soul, right? To love on one another. And so we really felt that we needed to love on each other and love ourselves. And so I had the art classes, and I also had an after-school program where people were able to come in and paint. They were able to sing, right? We did music classes, painting. We did theater pieces. We did a mural in Whittier Narrows Park. It's out there if you want to go check it out. And so it just became something that grew. And the young people kind of collectively decided, well, let's try to do this. And I said, okay, let's try to do this thing, or let's try to paint this. Let's try to tell these stories through poetry. So it just became something that the young people really connected to, because it's a way where they can express themselves and there's more freedom. In a traditional classroom, you have rules, like you have to follow. This is how you write this. This is how you present this. So I wanted the young people to find a place of safety where they can, present a rap in front of their colleagues, telling a story, but through rap, right? Or through poetry or through music. So that's how it just kind of grew into something that I'm still trying to create and figure out, right? But it was beautiful. It's still a beautiful process.
And through that process, what I've heard in your story, we've talked about before, is you really get to know your students on a personal level. You get to know what's happening outside of the classroom for them. And I'm wondering, what happens when they kind of move on to their next thing? Do you stay in touch with them, or do you still see them making art? What happens afterwards?
I'm surprised sometimes because I think the students that I think are not going to keep in contact are the ones that actually do, right? They're the ones who will look for you. They'll send you a message on Instagram, right? Or on Facebook and, hey, miss, what's going on? Or let's go have coffee. Let's meet up for, tea. And I love that. I love being able to do that with them. This particular student, Daniel, came back the next year to the classroom to visit. And I asked him what are you doing now, right? Because he was someone who grew into being a leader at the school. And he said, I'm doing the same thing you're doing, miss. I'm creating art with kids. And he had actually started volunteering at an elementary school by his home. And he was helping to run the art program, the after-school art program at the elementary school. And the last time I saw him, that's what he told me he was doing. So obviously, you're filled with a lot of joy, and when you hear that, because it gives you hope.
And I want to ask you, we've talked a lot about kind of how you bringing art has kind of impacted these students' lives, but I want to ask you, that's a two-way street. It's a conversation, right? By bringing art into your classroom, what have you learned? What did you learn from your students? What kind of insights did you get that you wouldn't have gotten maybe without it?
I think it reaffirmed the fact that we are all artists, right? We're all creators, and we're all children who want to paint and draw and sing and dance. And at some point in our lives, we're told we're not that anymore. We're told we have to follow certain rules or follow certain paths. It allowed me to accept the fact that I too am a creator, right? And so it's not only for my belief in teaching is that you're not really teaching, you're teaching each other, you're growing with each other, you're building, you're creating, you're learning from them because everyone has knowledge to share with each other. And so it really just made it more real to me, the idea that we as a society need to find ways in which to express our stories and our emotions, because those stay inside, and then that leads to other things, right, that need to be worked upon in our society. And so it's just spending time with the young people and creating reminded me that we as humans need to create. That's innate inside of us. To keep us joyful and happy and fulfilled, we all need to create through storytelling, through writing, through reading, through singing songs, through dancing, right? Whatever it is, like we all need to, as humans, create. It's something that the beginning of time humans have been creating. And so that's something we need to embrace and acknowledge and do more of.
Thank you so much, Larcie. Credentialed full-time teachers aren't the only instructors of arts in California. Obviously, we have a very thriving arts and cultural kind of hub here in Southern California, and it's a home to a community of artists who teach and bring their experience as professional working artists to students. Our final storyteller today came to music instruction by a path like that. She is a musician. She actually has her violin with her today. She's also the executive director of an organization called Education Through Music LA. Our last storyteller, Victoria Lanier.
I first met Sunny when she was a student in the 4th grade 7 years ago at Castelar Elementary School, a low-income Title I school situated in Chinatown, also the second oldest school in the LA Unified School District. Sunny was learning to play the violin in their school-wide music program that Education Through Music LA had implemented. In the violin section during ETMLA's Music Unites the World Festival, I had noticed a generally shy but confident child who beamed with joy and smiled ear to ear as she played. She seemed to be both happy and content, but focused with steely determination. After the festival, I congratulated all the students, and as I made my way to Sunny, her grandmother, Nisi, had graciously thanked me. Nisi shared, as I listened as intently as I could, how she had loved singing back in the day, especially jazz, and listened to all the greats, and was deeply grateful that Sunny gets to learn music in school. From that moment on, both Sunny and Nisi held a special place in my heart. As I got to know them more, I discovered Sunny did not have her parents around to raise her, that she needed to be a voice and care for her grandmother, and that they were struggling with financial hardship. The following year, I continued to see Sunny blossom in 5th grade in the music program. She was thriving musically and academically. After graduation, she was selected for a special scholarship program at Colburn, but on a different instrument, the clarinet. And while she joined the public middle school orchestra program, Sunny was hungry to go deeper on the violin. While I had a very full schedule, I felt compelled to do something because I had witnessed how the violin had become Sunny's outlet that brought her joy, pride, focus, and motivation in life. And I saw her incredible potential. So I decided to take her under my wing and gave her free lessons. I also saw that she needed a better instrument, so my husband and I decided to dip into our savings to get her a nicer violin. 2 years ago, she was accepted to the prestigious LA County High School for the Arts. The rigor of the high school orchestra combined with the heavy coursework was both welcoming but terrifying. The orchestra music alone was repertoire typically played by professional orchestras. On top of that, Sunny and Nisi were forced to move out of their apartment due to rising rent costs and gentrification. Hopping from one temporary housing situation to another, there were times Sunny had to travel up to 4 hours round trip by bus just to get to her lesson. I remember one particular lesson when I really heard what was going on in her life manifest in her playing. So vibrato is a technique crucial to violin playing. It provides warmth and emotion in the music you're playing. It's like seeing something in 3D versus 2D. So a quick example without vibrato. And with vibrato. For students who are learning to play vibrato, oftentimes they might have a concept of what they want it to sound like based on the recordings they've heard from great violinists. They rush through the process to get to that product. But as with learning any skill, you have to go through the proper steps. You can't skip steps. It's like baking a cake. To play vibrato correctly, it requires a type of relaxed control, patience, letting go, and trusting yourself and the process. During this lesson, I could see some of the things Sunny was facing outside of music come through in her playing. I could tell it was challenging. Her hand was tight, and her desire to produce a fast bravado was not only uncontrollable, it was potentially going to hurt her arm in the long run. And the attempt to control in this manner was choking the very voice she was trying to so beautifully convey. To achieve vibrato correctly, one cannot force it. It requires a slow, patient, and methodical approach so the left hand maintains flexibility and looseness. So we spent nearly the rest of the lesson problem solving on how to achieve a relaxed and controlled vibrato by being mindful of her breathing, self-aware of where she may be holding tension. We furthermore explored how building the technique affects the pitch, the sound, and the nuance and expression of the music. That lesson brought a breakthrough in Sunny. She began to grasp the idea that she can both be in control while completely loose and flexible, and that she can give herself permission to exhale and slow down. That in one small movement of the finger, in building the technique of vibrato the right way, it could impact the expression and creativity of her music. It was so beautiful to see Sunny become more heightened in her awareness of her own self, as she truly began to wrestle with the complex relationships of body, mind, soul, and expression. This lesson is resonating in other areas of her life. whether it's managing her overwhelming schedule, new challenges, or handling frustration, anxiety, and emotions. Through music and the relaxed control it requires, Sunny is continuing to let go, to be patient, and to trust. I love getting to see her smile from ear to ear. She is joyful. She is Sunny.
Thank you, Victoria. Victoria is our last storyteller today. After I have a quick conversation with her, we'll bring up our other guests to have kind of a panel type conversation about the themes and challenges that have been brought up in the different stories that they've shared with us today. And then I will open it up to all of you. So if you have questions that you want to ask them, start thinking about those and be ready to have those during the Q&A section. So I've got to ask you, Victoria, especially after hearing you play, even just a couple of quick notes, I just wanted to hear more. What brought you from, music and being a musician to music education? Why did you choose to do that?
So I feel like it found me. Right after college, after I graduated, I had no idea what I was going to do. I thought I was going to pursue professional violin career, which I also got to do, but I needed a job. So in the New York Times, there was an ad for teaching music in disadvantaged schools through a program called Education Through Music. And that first year, it was like I found myself. I love children. If there are any children in here, watch out. I fell in love with the process, and I was successful that first year where most people are like, the first year it was really hard. And I actually had a very successful first year because of the training and the nurture I got as a new teacher through this program, to be able to work with inner city kids, to know how to engage them, to work on classroom management and lesson planning. And so after 1 year, they said, Victoria, you're really good at teaching. Do you want to mentor new teachers? And I was like, sure. So in my second year, found myself mentoring new teachers, but knew I needed more, so went and got my master's in music education at Teachers College. And then from there, I was doing a lot in New York City, working with Carnegie Hall's programs for high schools. New Jersey Symphony said, will you help us with our outreach programs in inner city Newark? So I found myself doing a lot of work in the inner city with kids and building string programs. And and then fast forward, moved out to LA with my husband. He's in the industry, and said, we need to move to LA. And I was probably cried and said, honey, this is my whole world is New York and East Coast. And he said, honey, there are kids in LA. And so I said, okay. So when I was working in other nonprofits and also performing as a violinist in schools, I kept hearing over and over, this is so beautiful, but our kids are not even learning music. We need help. Can you help us? And I just kept thinking, why isn't there a program like Education Through Music in Los Angeles? And so founded Education Through Music LA in 2006. Yeah. Thank you.
And I'm curious, when you said you were mentoring, teachers at Education Through Music, like what advice were you giving them? What do you think teachers of music in schools, should know or should do?
So if you are an educator, you know the challenges. I think as a new teacher, I could relate to a lot of the people that I was mentoring because, you might know your craft. You spend years and years on that art discipline. But to be successful as an educator, as someone who can communicate and help kids go from point A to point B, point C, to understand and really sequentially develop understanding on concepts and skills. I mean, that takes also study of how do kids learn, what are strategic and educational processes. And so it's that, Seymour Sarensen book, Teaching is a performing art. It's like, how do we, as educators, develop those skills? And so it's having a mirror, somebody saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing, in your communication with kids. Maybe you're too wordy, cut it down, or use more visual language, metaphors so they can understand. How do you build a constructivist classroom so it's student-centered? So these are things, that I was able to help, and I love when I get feedback as I am a teacher as well. Yeah.
And I mean, that leads into the next thing that I was going to ask you, which is, when you went into your first classrooms, teaching art, teaching music, what did you learn from working with the students that you were working with in the classroom environment, you coming into that education world?
How little I knew. It's like, I know so little. Gosh, the first year, so that was now 1999, 20 years ago, I learned that every child matters, that every child and how you relate to every child matters, that it's not a one-size-fits-all, and through music, I was seeing kids who were labeled problem kids. I would have classroom teachers say, oh, watch out, this kid is this and this and this. And, yeah, they were like rambunctious and they couldn't sit still. But in violin class, they had to learn that self-awareness and what do I do with this arm and what do I do with my feet? And, and then there were kids, and so those labeled problem kids were actually some of the most motivated kids. And then I had kids who were really shy, and music helped them emote and come out of their shell. So I just quickly learned, the lesson plans and the approach needs to start with the student first. Yeah.
So you had those experiences, you came out to LA, you founded and now are the executive director of Education Through Music LA. How do these experiences, with your students, the ones you've had in the past, inform this like nonprofit work that you do now in your organization?
Wow, all my experiences as an educator and teaching music are crucial. They're integral to who I am as a leader and as someone who is doing work in advocacy. I think it's important to look at life as completely interconnected, and it's all those things coming together to inform whether it's problem solving, how as an artist, as a professional violinist, how do I achieve this really hard excerpt, this very difficult passage. There's so much problem solving and being creative and open and trusting, when you have to go on stage and perform, like to be patient with yourself, and that it's a process, it's a lifelong process. And how do we relate to one another? How do we bring people into the conversation? Who are we serving and why are we doing this? I think these are important questions that I continue to get out there and to ask of myself.
And I also want to ask you, the organization that you're the executive director of is Education Through Music. So I kind of want LA. So I want to ask you, why, imagine a skeptic, why music? Why do this work through that particular art?
Gosh, I don't know even where to begin. I think music, it teaches those life skills. Everything that a child can learn in music is transferable to their life. It's transferable to their thinking processes, cognition, how to emote, how to express. They're learning mathematical concepts, patterns, sequence, difficult concepts. You take, abstract concepts that can be manifested through sound, through communication. Gosh, I would need like 20 years to like share, but I think the things that kids are learning through music are so empowering to them in their life, and studies and research have also shown that.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Stay here for a second. I'd like to bring Sophia and Larcie back to the stage so we can have a conversation all together now. I think the first thing I'll ask you, a lot of my reporting for our station circles around this idea of who gets to make art and who doesn't, and why. So I kind of want to ask the three of you about that. I'm curious what you think it would take to bring more arts to more students so more of them could benefit from the things that you've described today? Any of you could jump in.
Well, I definitely think, we need to have administration understand the importance of arts education, and then administration is definitely I think when an arts program is successful in a classroom or in a school, it's successful because administration has embraced it and has allowed it to flourish and trust the teacher, allows the teacher to move forward with it. Or in a school district, right? You can tell which school districts put the money into the education of arts. But that's also tied to then where the money comes from, the state, right? So definitely there needs to be, and I do see it in the last 4 or 5 years, I see a resurgence of implementing arts education and seeing the importance of arts education and arts therapy, and how social emotional learning can connect to a young person and an adult and children. So I think it's flourishing, it's coming back. I know when I was a child, I felt that it was very alive and it allowed me to go through school. And so I really do think it needs to, somehow it's growing, but we need to reach those who have the, who have the ties to the funding for it.
Yeah, and I think things like this event, getting the message across in every which way we can to bring these stories to life, that it's, that it makes it real and personal. And I just want to actually quickly introduce you to Sunny, who's here today. Sunny, can you stand? Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I just an understanding that the arts isn't just for funsies. It's not finger painting. It's life changing. And if administration, adults, students, teachers, larger audiences across the nation understood that the arts are integral to humanity, then just get out of the way and watch people become, amazing.
When I asked that question initially, I heard a couple people say funding or money. So I wanted to ask the three of you, it's one thing to say that you want to make art in your classroom, is another thing to actually do it. So I'm curious if you can kind of share how you were able to make it happen in your classroom. What resources were you looking to? What questions were you asking? Things like that.
So for me, I know filmmaking, everybody always goes to, we don't have money for cameras, or we don't have money for sound equipment, and it takes equipment, but we're not looking at the equipment, we're looking at the story. That's number one. So if the kids were just using their cell phones, everybody has one at this point, and yet they get engaged with a cell phone instead of being on a cell phone as consumers, which is crazy, I know. But the other part of that is I was lucky enough that when I sat down to create the curriculum, which was the hybrid course, and I submitted it to the state, we got a specialized program grant that gave us the initial funding source for the first iteration of the cameras. As I continued creating curriculum for the second year and third year, they kept funding it because it was growing and it was keeping students in school, and the population was growing, and it became this thing that people wanted. So it was like, build it and they will come. And so that's part of it. The other part is Career Technical Education, or CTE, has funding. And the other part of it is teachers that are willing to hustle, and administration that is willing to help that teacher hustle, or help that, they're hustling too, to like fundraising and finding grants and finding little areas where there's a little bit of funding sources to create that seed for creativity.
Yeah, I truly believe that teachers probably are the most resourceful people, right? we pick up, whatever it is, and you can use it in your classroom, whatever is there. I think, I know for me, I did do a lot of the work with the young people. We did like a Rangoli, create a Rangoli Indian symbol, and I had them bring in, like whatever leftover rice they had, and we mixed it with chocolate, because it was, not chocolate, with chalk. It was too expensive to go out and buy like colored chalk, and we blended it, and we used that to create it. So something like that. But I was also really grateful. Last year, I applied to the Pacific Coast,
Pacific Standard Time.
Pacific Standard
Oh,
Time,
that's how we
right? A
met.
grant, right? And that's how I met Carla. I applied to a grant, and just for the heck of it, right? You never think anything's going to come of it, and applied for the full amount. And I told them I would love to create an open mic night with youth from different parts of Los Angeles around the theme of what is a MILA, right? And so I was able to get that grant funding, and we created an open mic night in downtown LA. We were able to get a studio that gave us a lower price, and had young people from different parts of Los Angeles come out and share their art and share their poetry and their spoken word pieces. And so I think in my case, I was looking for stuff. I was looking for something, because you can't always do it on your own, right? And that's something that I think teachers, we carry that idea of, we have to do it all. This is my classroom. This is my, right? And we have to let go of that and tear down the classroom walls, right? And that's how we open up and allow blessings to come in, so that we can create those blessings with the young people. So.
Yeah, I would say, I think it goes back to the question of what do we value, right? And if we see arts education as core to a child's learning and their right as part of, their formative years, and going, to help them develop into who they are intended to become and to reach their fullest potential, then we see it as a non-negotiable. And I think that conversation needs to keep being pressed, so that we get to the administrative, level, and they believe that, because you won't cut things, you won't that won't even be a question if that belief, of music, arts are non-negotiable is intact.
And I'm curious, I also want to ask you, all three of you shared very specific stories about a student, because that's what we asked you to do. But I'm curious about what kind of effects outside of that you've seen in your classroom as a whole, not just a one student. Do you see them, how do you see your classrooms reacting to the arts coming in?
For mine, for a teacher, it's always nice to hear a student say, this is my favorite class. But when you hear a whole class say, this is my favorite class, or the only reason why I show up to school is this class, and that's their 5th period or 6th period, or the last class period of the day, and they had to go through 5 other periods before you, it's like, wow, you really committed to that. But even just being in the class, when they're smiling, when they're happy, when they're so excited to just be there, how do you not show up to work every day? But aside from that too, yes, I shared one story on Miguel, but there's 180 other stories that are similar to Miguel, and they've changed their lives, and they're changing their lives. And so it's that excitement of the next 20 years, imagine how many lives are being changed.
So I think it also reaches out to their family, right? I know in their community, we work with young people who are moms and dads, and many times they bring their children to class sometimes. And when we had the mural program, we partnered up with the LA Parks and Rec through a friend of mine who does arts in Pomona, and he's connected to that. And he said, we need students. And I said, I need a wall for my students. And so we went, and we would show up on Saturdays for a whole month. And it wasn't just the student. It was the students and their children and their brothers and their sisters and their moms, right? And their friends. And so it's this idea of art transcends borders. It transcends languages. It transcends mindsets too, right? And so I see it in, like you said, not just in our one student that we shared the story of, but we see it in the students who are around that, touched by it, and then they share it with their family and friends, and they come back and tell you, oh, my daughter is taking this class at school and she's so excited, or this is, what my mom and I are talking about, we're doing it. So it's really transformative to a community as well.
Yeah, so Education Through Music LA is now reaching about 15,000 children. And so, yes, like Sunny is one of so many thousands and thousands of children's stories out there. And I think the best way to describe the before and after picture of when music education becomes a part of the community is that the school seems very like gray. There's not a lot of like vibrancy. And by the time a year or 2 years have progressed and they've had music education, the school is just vibrant. The parents are engaged, not just the kids, but the parents become excited because they see their kids excited to come to school. They're motivated, and we see, just so many changes and transformative things where, people can communicate better, and the empathy, I think, is something that children learn so beautifully through music, and it becomes a very close-knit community, especially I would say for the low income. More and more kids are struggling with so many hardships, but for the low income, poor neighborhoods, they just they need as much support to be able to succeed in this life.
Yeah, I was at a meeting of principals, and I think one of your schools, actually, one of the principals was there, and she was talking about the fact that a lot of families will now come to the performances, and it's a way to kind of integrate them into the arts and introduce them to the teachers in the school.
Yeah, no, it's phenomenal to see the turnout, beginning of the year when there's no music program, like minimal turnout. We get that they have work, and so, but by the end of the year, it's standing room only. It's incredible.
The last thing I want to ask you before turning to our Q&A with the audience is a bit about kind of, you've shared these experiences in your classrooms now. I'm curious what you're looking to next. Like, is there something that you want to try that's new, or something you want to do a little bit differently than you've done before? I'm curious, when you're thinking about arts education in the classrooms that you've worked in or lead, what are you looking for in the arts education of the future? Big question.
World domination. No. What the next step for the students and myself is a self-run film festival where the students 100% produce, create, run, contact, do it all on their own, and find the venues and find the films, and they have to go through all the films that get uploaded or turned in. From a step from that is actually, and I'm really excited to do this one next year, is we've now connected with a lot of people downtown because we're like 2-minute walking distance to our downtown. And so it's like we break down those classroom walls so that the students can see their own community and say, hey, I'm a filmmaker, you have a business, you want to film for your business? And so they start connecting with the businesses in downtown to start creating. So that's kind of the immediate next step, and then the film festival. And then for me, kind of what she's doing in her classroom is really developing an English for the arts class where they're doing music and film and theater and printmaking through English.
So I, right now, I'm actually not in the classroom. I took a year sabbatical just to get, what do I want to do in this field, right? I love the young people in the classroom, and I love the work we do, but the walls of the classroom, I just felt it was time to move out of them. And so I'm still connected to the community there. But something I'm doing through the arts program that came out of the classroom, the Papachar Arts Collective, is finding ways to tie local artists with community in different communities in different parts of the country and the world. And so when I got the grant from Pacific Standard Time, I was able to bring in artists from the community to come into the classrooms in different parts of LA so that they could share their craft, a spoken word artist, a poet, and then a painter, right? And so what I did this last summer is I connected with a friend in Quito, Ecuador. She works for the city of Quito, And I said, hey, I have artists who want to go down and support whatever work is being done with the communities there. And she said, great, I have community spaces where they're beginning their own programs here. And so we were able to go, 3 of us were able to go down and spend a couple weeks with different communities in Quito and just supporting the locals that were working already in creating programming and arts programming. And so that's something that is really close to my heart, and just find, I want to go into like especially immigrant communities and where you don't get, like you said, there's not access to it as much, and not just the children, but their parents, right? To go in to do healing through arts workshops with the moms, right? With the dads, right? Or in hospitals, in spaces. And so I just started the social emotional arts certificate through UCLA, so I'm super excited about that, to be able to bring in what I experienced with my young people and then take it out to different spaces in the community, in here and in other places. I'm speaking with a friend who is a violinist in Jalapa, Veracruz, and she's a music teacher, and just creating those connections, right? Because like music transcends border, art transcends borders. If we knew each other more, right? If we knew who we were, if we knew who we are ourselves, and if we knew each other more, how much could we transform the world, right? And so that's something that's really on my heart as I move into the next step.
Thank you.
I guess I'll share from a maybe micro and macro level in terms of next steps. So as the leader of Education Through Music LA, we are in Los Angeles serving 6 out of the 80 school districts. And so while 15,000 kids sounds like a lot, it's just a little drop in the bucket. And so it's, how do we get to more students? And how do we, again, ask that question of, what do people believe? Do they really believe that music education is the right of every child, that it should be core curricular? And if we believe in equity and access, should it not start from school where every child will receive that? Kindergarten through 12th grade, these are their formative years, and they don't get them back. And so I think on that micro level, it's also pushing professional development. How do we build future and build that, the pipeline of educators and arts educators up? And then on a macro level, I would say just continuing to connect with folks like yourselves. How do we build advocacy and get people to come on board with this important work? Create CA is doing some great work in advocacy, that creativity is not optional, right? And we want kids to all be successful. So, Create CA, yeah.
All right, well, I could talk about this with you all day, but I'm going to turn to the audience now. My colleagues are running around with some mics for you. If you have a question that you would like to pose to the panel, please raise your hand, and they'll come to you with a mic. And as much as you can you try to keep your questions brief so we can get to as many of them as possible? And let's make sure they're questions, okay?
Stand up and everything? Okay. Oh my God, what do you have in here? Stuff. Okay, sorry. Come on. Thank you. You guys are all lovely, but you make me feel like a dinosaur. We need some old broads on the next, or gentlemen on the next thing. I work for LAUSD. I'm now retired. I run Inner City Shakespeare 10 years. We do Shakespeare all over the county, and it's for free. And our biggest problem is this. There are 10,000 theaters in LA County, and there are 5 in South Central. 2 are so expensive we could never use. As theater people, even though we're flexible, we do parks, we do other stuff, but as our kids grow up, they deserve theaters. What can we collectively do to make it possible to have spaces? Theater needs spaces, and schools have theater, but they're far too expensive for us to use. So what can we do as a collective to make those theaters available, or to create spaces that actors can use?
Yeah, I'll just say that's a great question. I think innovative partnerships. Look on LA County, LA Arts Ed Collective. They're doing some great work around building partnerships and ensuring that people know who's out there, right? And where's the need and who has a solution to that? How are we connecting ourselves as a community? And, you know, do people know that there are only 5 in South Central, right? I think making sure that people who are in this space, that we are building greater networks so that
KPCC help us get that word out.
We're talking about it here now. Do either of you, it's okay if not, have anything to add about like ways you've been maybe creative, to expand the question, creative in finding places for your students to perform or do their work?
I think definitely conversations like this, and also, you know, there's a generational divide like you were talking about, right? And so we need to bridge that generational divide, like, because I can think of a couple of community spaces that would be interested in something like that in South LA. So it's just like, you know, I think sometimes we tend to get into our own, like I do it too, right? You get into like your own circle of people, and you're like, why don't we have this? If we just like moved out and started creating those conversations, you know, something great could be built.
It's the networking and ensuring that you can blast it out and create this almost social networking that reaches audiences that you don't even know it's going to reach. If that means that you just put it on your cell phone and you blast it out through social media or.
The issue is if our children are going to become professional, and many of my students are on Broadway, they need to work in spaces that are close to what they'll expect when they get professional work. And we do things in gyms and parks and all that. We're going to perform, but we don't have access to wireless mics and places we can put our sets and all that. And it's just not fair, and it's not that we haven't tried, it just isn't interesting. And it's hard when people are dealing with AIDS and poverty and homelessness to say, I want a place to do a play.
Thank you so much for your question. I'll catch you afterwards to learn a little bit more about what you're talking about too.
Hi, my name is Carol Parker, and I worked, all of you are amazing, and I'm sure all of us are equally as amazing. I know we are. I worked in New York for 20 years, and now I've been in Los Angeles for 20 years, which is my home. And I created 3 classes in art appreciation and theater arts. I produced shows in both New York and California. But my biggest problem, and I'll piggyback on the woman that just spoke, is with the theater, there is no money. It is really horrible. I've done creative things, I made it work, but my big issue is that because we are all in the arts, we are talking about the messages that we send, whether it's with paint, singing, dancing, whatever it is, film, theater, film, television, which I've taught classes in, and the rhetoric that we speak when we are on stage as original students and with our music. And I think right now in the climate we're living in, rhetoric is very, very important for students to learn public speaking, which I know they must have done when both of you women, and I'm sure also you, got students on the stage to speak either with a violin or by music or by their ideals. But that needs to be taken out into the world. Before it can be done, we need trips to the museums, to the theaters, to the musicals. New York was easy. Every kid knows how to get to Broadway. Every kid gets to see plays. Every kid goes to Lincoln Center and listens to virtuosos. In LA, it was hell for me. I ended up paying for my students to see Phantom of the Opera. But you know what that was like. It was a battle because my principal, why do you, I'm gonna do it, just, you know. And then finally she went and was like, this is really good. We should see it again. I got the tickets a year ago. You can't see it again until another year. My question is, how in the world are we to find money for our students to go out and find and discover and learn what's in the theaters, what's in museums, what you're doing when they're telling us there's no money in the arts?
Oh. I'll have you guys connect after the program. But to turn that question to the panel, I mean, I asked you a little bit about this before. Where are kind of places you turn when you're looking for resources? What are kind of your tried and trues in that way?
Gosh, I'm hearing this issue in Los Angeles, the industry capital. I mean, to me, that's like, so for music, we tap into people who are successful musicians, composers. I mean, these are people for whom music obviously made an impact in their life. And I think it's, how do we connect the people for whom they are doing that art form with,
It's funny because I'm in Orange County and I do film, so we always have to go into LA in order to do anything. And even when we do go into LA, the first thing that people think is, oh, that's just a 12-year-old. That's a liability on our studio set or on or whatever. But then I say, okay, but if you step on my campus, you're not a liability quite yet. So if you come to us, we'll be happy to learn from you. And then when they turn 17, 18, I'll be happy to lead them back to you, because it's a win-win. And what we're doing here, just what I saw here, that was incredible. And to not rely on somebody else who understands the walls that you're facing, and it's like, hey, do you have half a ladder? Because I have another half a ladder, and we can jump this wall and go over it. And I learned it too, because everybody started asking me like, well, you're not going to have funding for your equipment next year. And I started freaking out. I was like, that's what my curriculum is based on. It uses equipment, and it's an industry-grade equipment. What am I going to do? And I had to stop thinking through a deficit mindset to what can I do? And how can I make everybody who told me no look terrible? Because it was just one of those like, oh, yeah, remember when you told me that we couldn't do it? Well, we did it outside on the park. And everybody now wants to be a part of it, but it's okay. You don't have to do anything anymore.
I think that goes back to your world domination comments. Yeah. Okay. But I think it goes back to putting the question back on you. What is your rhetoric? Who are you bringing alongside? It's not just the arts makers. It's the people in science, technology. It's broadening. Again, when we talk about life skills, arts do that. And so everybody's part of this conversation. So it's that networking, it's making sure you're knocking on the doors, and I've knocked down a lot of doors, so.
Okay, thank you for sharing your stories. What I wanted to actually ask was that a lot of the stories that we heard today talk about arts and sort of improving language skills, and the conversations are a lot about English or other languages. And I wanted to know your thoughts about how arts can be integrated in other subjects, specifically like the sciences or mathematics. That was something I struggled with as a teacher as well. Very easy to do it when you're like reading a book, but then when I'm teaching like decimals, how do I bring that in so kids enjoy that as much?
I'd love to take that one. I mean, when I was a teacher, integration was how I taught music, because again, everything is interconnected. And when I'm trying to teach do, re, mi, fa, sol, and the solfege, that's like Roy G. Biv, the sequence of colors, sequence of notes. Kids automatically and some teachers may say, oh, I have to know what the standards are in English and in science and math. And I say, yes, but it's also going to inform their music teaching. So if you want them to go deeper on music, it's only, everything works together so they can go deeper on everything, right? And so, we pull in mathematical concepts. What are the benchmarks and the, goals that we want kids to achieve in math? So how do you connect that with that music lesson or the arts lesson? I'm happy to do an example. I'm happy to get them all on their feet and do rhythmic things, but we can do that later.
We can do that later. Find Victoria if you would like to do that.
Sorry, it's the teacher in me. I'm and then, examples of, science, I think, how do we ask questions? How do we discover, the process of hypothesis, So, gosh, if we do this on this instrument, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to the sound? So these are all, it's endless in how they're connected. I'm happy to share more later.
So I know of a class and I got excited when I heard it because I'm a horrible math person. I'm horrible at math and sciences, but it's Da Vinci math, and it's learning through Da Vinci, like Leonardo da Vinci, and how he did, like it was art. And when somebody started doing an equation using art, I was like, this totally makes sense. Why am I this age learning it now? But then on top of that, if you start looking at academics, science, history, math, if you start looking at academics as a creative space, you're going to embed the arts without even knowing it. It goes back to the hypothesis. How do you create? I mean, if you look at an engineer, an architect, and you look at the industry and things that exist that kids can become a part of, they need the arts. Again, that's crazy, I know. But.
Well, I was just going to add on to what you were saying is that at least in the model that we grew up in, the Western model of education, everything is separated, right? And that's the reality is it's not. Everything is a part of everything else. And I get like my math teacher was not my math teacher, but the teacher that taught math next door to me, she always had that struggle too. So we would sit down and come up with ideas. But it's that understanding that we need to go back to we need to get rid of the belief that things are separate, that this is science and you only do science, and this is English and you only do English, right? Everything really, when you look at it, it's all interconnected. And we have to hang out with that art teacher if you're the math teacher, and just find ways to build together.
Here.
Hello, my name is Matt Osmond. I'm an elementary school principal in Burbank. And the three of you, really the four of you, represent different genres of art. And at the elementary school level, we often try to encourage kids to try lots of different things and not to focus on any one genre or sport for that matter or activity. And I'm curious if through your experience and your expertise, if you feel like there is an age or a grade or a maturity level or an ability level at which it is important to become a single focus, or if it's feasible, though truthfully not necessarily realistic, to be able to excel or experience all different kinds of things throughout a child's education, even through high school and university.
I think I want to piggyback on Victoria said earlier. If you're starting to look at student and it's student-centered, you'll know, because they'll tell you. But if in elementary school they're getting this exploratory and they're figuring things out and they're kind of having fun, by middle school, some of the stuff starts dying away because, they know it all in middle school. And then by high school, they start figuring out, like, wait a minute, life is going to start in 4 years. So then they have, like, I call it, like what you do in college, a major and a minor. And so I tell my freshman students, like, minor in something and major in something. Pick film and band or art and choir. And figure it out. By 11th grade, you should be majoring, and you hone in on that. But they needed that exploratory elementary courses where they're getting their childhood and figuring themselves out and their identity, so that when they reach those last 4 years before they're 18, considered adults and ready for the real world, they do feel a sense of self and ready for the real world.
I want to add in the sense that that's ideal, right? That's the ideal for a child, right? We want children to have the time where they explore, and then I feel that if they're allowed to continue to explore, they naturally go towards one of the things or two of the things they're interested in. But at some point in our school system, many don't make it to that 11th grade where they continue to hold on to that love for whatever art it was or whatever, subject matter or whatever interest it is. So I guess my question, it's back at everyone just to think about, is what is going on in our schools, in our classrooms, in our home lives, in our family, in our society, where you have a big chunk of our youth that are not able to carry, they're not able to carry that innate creator inside them anymore. right? Where are we as family and friends and teachers and society telling them, you aren't this, you're not an artist. You have so many adults, right? Or young people like, let's do some art and create something, but I'm not. I've been told my whole life. And when you're a kid, you're like, so what has happened, right? I look at that, what has happened in our society that we're not allowing those young people, those children to hold on to that love for creation.
Yeah, and quickly to add, I would say, I think whatever the art form is, and again, listening to your community, your students, it's important to go deep, right? Because it's in that discipline and going through that that kids will be able to, transfer a lot of the concepts and skills. But if it's always surface, it's, they're not struggling and they're not wrestling with the challenges of that art form. And so that's a tough question, for educators who, have to decide, is it music, is it theater arts, is it dance, But I think coming at it from a space of, well, we want well-rounded education, and that's important. So if that's what everybody can agree to, well, and the fact that every kid gets an opportunity to do this art form because that's equity and that's access. And I think we're starting from the right place. Yeah, and hi, Matt, and congrats on your variety show. Sorry, I know, Matt.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Christina Canarella, and I have found that creativity and art is a key component and a magnet for successful inclusion for students of all abilities. I'm curious if you have included people with developmental and intellectual challenges in your programs and what the impact has been on you and your students.
At the school I teach at, we're at 80% ELL, English language learner, and we're at 78% special education population. So in my class, on average, we have about anywhere between 5 to 15 students are special education. And I love going to the meetings where you sit with their case carriers and all these other academic teachers, and I'm the hybrid, weird English academic teacher, and they always turn to like, well, they're not engaged, they're not turning in their work, and I turn around, and I'm like, you want to see their movie? I'll show you. And it's they may be quiet in other classrooms, and they may not raise their hand, and they might not follow everything, or they may not get the worksheet, but because in music and in theater and in art, there's always something. They can either be behind the camera or they can be running sound. And if they have auditory processing issues and they're running sound, that skill and getting them to work it, and then somebody turns around and is like, oh my God, sound guy did amazing today. And then they feel so like, oh my, I'm good. And that's my favorite part, because again, within the arts, you create that space where things are safe and it's okay to fail. In fact, you probably should, and then you'll learn, and then you'll fail again, and then you'll keep learning. And that makes that learning fun again. I've actually had student, he didn't have legs or arms, and he ran slate. And it was so cool to see that, because he totally took that job and ran with it, and hearing him come into his own doing that, it makes it, even for the students that don't have issues, to like, wait, why can't I do that? And it's like, right, why can't you? So it kind of, again, I go back to, it starts, the heart is the arts, and it brings it back into the classroom.
Yeah, one of my first years teaching a violin class, it was inclusion, and there were about 3 kids from the special needs department that came and joined, and I was like, I'm a first-year teacher, like, how do I do this? And again, because I love children, and I'm someone who, naturally, like, I listen to what they want, although don't ask my son, because there are times he'll be like, what? I think that it was so empowering for the other kids to see how they could help out and connect and be a part of that. It sort of it leveled the playing field, for everyone. And the kids who were from the special needs group, they were some of my best students on the violin, and so our programs are from that approach. Now, again, we work with the schools and we listen to them. So if there's a separate group and they're like, we want them to have their own music class, and we honor that. And the other kids are all inclusion with them, and mainstreamed. So, yeah. It's a good question.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's actually all the time that we have for questions, at least in this format right now. But I'll be hanging out here a little bit after. We can talk and connect. Maybe some of our guests will too. And we also have my colleague Quincy over there. He has a recording kit. He's kind of waving right now. He can grab any specific stories. If coming to this and hearing these stories kind of inspired something in you that you want to share, go find Quincy. He'd love to hear your stories about how learning art or teaching art has impacted you as a student or as a teacher in the classroom. And then I just have a couple thank yous to say. We want to give a special thank you to the Rosenthal Family Foundation for supporting our arts education coverage here at KPCC. I'd also like to thank our storytellers for coming up here and sharing their stories and expertise with us. Thanks to KPCC in person for bringing us all together today. And lastly, and most importantly, thanks to all of you for coming and engaging in this conversation with us. If there are stories that we aren't sharing about art or the people teaching it that you want to share, please reach out, come talk to me. That's what we're trying to do at KPCC, and we do that with you, our listeners, our audience, our community. And thanks so much. Have a good rest of your day.